Okay, so welcome back to a very quick video, and this one is an important announcement for all the TCU testers and anyone who wants to build their own TCU board from scratch using the schematics on GitHub. Please watch the whole video because this will explain a lot, and then there won't be any questions or you guys accidentally messing something up and potentially breaking something. So essentially, we've come across a little bit of a problem, which is that we've had originally these red PCBs. These were the early ones that I released back in December 21. And then since then we've come up with a newer design, this 1.2 board, which has got the analog TRS shifter support and a bunch of other I/O on it. And I'm currently working on version 1.3, which will have some additional input logic as well as support for general purpose I/O, so that you can actually put an input speed sensor for your output shaft on the board. You can configure a pin to be an output speed pulse for something like the W124's instrument cluster speedometer. And you also have another MOSFET here on the new boards which I'm designing. As you can see, so we've got 3 different board versions now. Well, the third one coming. Now, the problem with this is that up until now we've had many different firmware versions. So there'll be a version of the firmware for the red board, a version of the firmware for this black board, but as the 1.3 boards are also going to be black, I can't just say red and black anymore. So to solve this issue, I've essentially come up with a way for you to, when I build the boards and distribute them to people, I will have this information already burnt into them so no one has to deal with it. So any boards that are received after today, which is the 30th of November 2022, you won't have to do this unless your TCU beeps up like this on the latest firmware. Any of the testers, you will have to do this because you will have to set this one-time change. But also make sure that you stick around to the end because I'll need to show you how to set the EGS type, because we also used to have different firmware for EGS 51, 52 and 53 ECUs. Now that's all under one unified firmware, and you have to basically set that in the configuration app now so that the TCU knows which CAN layer to run, as well as if you have the old school shifter or the newest style CAN-based shifter. So let's get into it. So here I have a 1.2 board which I've just assembled, and I've uploaded the firmware onto it, the latest one. Again, I'll put all links to this in the description, everything, all the firmware download, the config app link, and anyone in the TCU Telegram group, please feel free to reach out if you guys have any questions. Anyone else with questions, please put this in the video comments. So if I plug it in, you will now notice you hear this beep sequence of long, 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 short. This is to indicate that the TCU is unconfigured, it has no idea what board it is, it's basically sending a distress code. If you plug this into your car, it will be as if there is no TCU in the car, nothing will happen. So I'm going to just hold my finger on that so that you don't hear the speaker too loudly. So let's launch the config app, and I'll show you what you need to do. So we're going to select the TCU. Forget this API legacy thing unless you're on a really old TCU or really old firmware version, but on the newest firmware version which does this, you do not need to select API legacy. I will eventually remove this option from the connection list. So we select our TCU, launch, and we're going to go to configure vehicle or drive or gearbox. Select that, and we can click reconfiguration. Now this is the important bit, is this eFuse config. Now as you can see at the bottom of my screen here, the TCU is spamming to logs, but it cannot start the TCM because eFuse config is not set. So as you can see from the images on the screen, you've got the red board, which is V1.1, and you've got the black board, which is V1.2, and the development board is from V1.3, so do not select that, because your board is definitely not V1.3, because I have never released a single board, and the schematic's not available yet for that. So all that you need to do is to go to choose board variant, and select your board type. So in this case it's a 1.2 board, so I'll select V1.2. Now, in this current version of the config app, there is a little bit of a bug where V1.2 gets, once you select it, gets abbreviated to V12, and 1.1 is V11, and 1.3 is V13, so ignore that. But all that you need to know is V1.2 is V12, essentially it's just remove the decimal point. And then all we have to do is to say, write eFuse config, and you'll get a little pop-up to say, are you sure that you've selected the right board variant? So I can say take me back, in which case I can select it again, like choose a different one if I selected wrong. So really easy for you to figure out which board yours is. If it's physically red, it's the V1.1 board. If it's physically black, it's the V1.2 board. Although there's, I think, 3 blue V1.2 boards, which are really early preview units. So if your board is blue in color, you're also selecting v1.2, but those are very rare. So I'm going to say write, and I'm going to say yes, I'm sure. And now you hear 2 beeps, and the beeping has stopped, so the TCU is now happy. It knows what it is, and we can basically go back for now. So if I have a look at the logs, here we go. We can see read efuse config board version 1.2, week 48, 30th of 11th, 2022. So that was me setting. So when you set this configuration, you also set the production date of the board. So that way, when I build these boards and send them out, I've set the production date as well, so the TCU knows when it was built. That's purely for timekeeping purposes, because I know eventually these boards might fail, like several years down the line. But I kind of want to know if any boards kind of start failing early, so that bakes the information into it, so I know from the get-go. And then you can also see here GPIO matrix version 1.2. Now, this is what's interesting here. So now you can see here, init, error, CAN mode not set, falling back to basic CAN for diagnostics only. So if you plug this into your car, again, nothing will happen. Well, it will appear as nothing will happen to you, because there will be no CAN bus interaction with the car, because the TCU doesn't know which type of car you're on. So let's go back to the config app, and now if we go back, and we go back into configure vehicle gearbox, and we read configuration again, you will now see some more options on here. So we get to, from here, select the EGS CAN layer, and we get to select, so for my car it's an E55 AMG, we're going to select EGS52, and I have the EWM CAN shifter, not the TRRS shifter, which is an analog one, which is the old 4321 shifter. If you have plus and minus on your gear selector, you have EWM. If you have 4321 on the gear selector, then you have TRRSS. I cannot say that word. It's a tongue twister. And then lastly, ignore the SLR McLaren option. This is just a placeholder for when we eventually start playing around with that car, because that car has a different style shifter. So we're going to select EWM CAN, and I'm going to write SCN configuration. And as well as all of that, you will have to reprogram all of your differential ratio, wheel circumference, which is the back wheels, your engine type, your engine RPM, and if you have 4MATIC, and the high and low ratios. Again, if you're in a TCU group, you are aware that I kind of send this information out to people, and there are ways for you to look this up using stuff like Wiz. So it's pretty standard stuff. And also, if you have the large 722.6, you need to tick that. And then you can set your own default profile for when the TCU starts up to whatever profile you want. And then after we write it, TCU boots up. And now this is when you would see stuff in your car happening normally. And in fact, I can confirm on here that EGS52 CAN constructor called, meaning that it has launched the EGS52 CAN layer on the TCU. So now everything's working. That is all you need to do. So just to recap, if you are building your board, or you have a current board which you're upgrading to the latest firmware, you need to set the efuse config, and then everyone needs to update the EGS version. Rather than downloading the firmware for EGS 51, 52, or 53, you now set this all in a firmware level in the configuration app. So that is all. As usual, if you guys have any questions about this, feel free to comment down below. I prefer for the testers who know about this to message me in the Telegram group, because that's a lot easier for me to reach out to people and, on the one-to-one basis send help and resolve queries and also debug certain things. Also, I'm still, if you want to apply to receive one of these TCUs, I will leave the form link in the description for you to apply to, and I tend to send emails out to everyone every weekend or so, or every other weekend, so depending on how many people apply. But other than that, as usual, like and share the video. Again, if you're a TCU tester, please make sure you do this, otherwise your TCU will not work in your car. And as I said, new boards being built by me will have the efuse data all set, so you'll just have to set the CAN matrix version. But other than that, I will see you in the next one, so goodbye.